Welcome to A Slice of Therapy. This podcast was created with Anchor. And if you've not heard of Anchor, let me explain. It's free. It's a really easy way to make a podcast. And it helps me because I can just do this every day directly into my phone, because there's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. So if you fancy making a podcast too, download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. So here's something really freaky that kind of has blown my mind a little bit, and I thought I'd share it with you. I've just been listening to an interview with a guy named Donald Hoffman, who I think is a physicist. Sounds very much like a physicist. And one of his academic specialties is something called evolutionary game theory, where it uses mathematics to kind of figure out how the theory of evolution kind of works. And he's teamed up with a leading mathematician so they can actually, because you know how physicists are, they do everything in mathematical calculations. So the pair of them have been working together in order to look at evolution and specifically to look at reality and whether we're seeing reality. So you know this concept that I've mentioned before, how the brain is basically in this dark chamber of the skull and it has no direct experience to what's out there. And so what it has to do is basically take these sort of sensory inputs from our bodies and from our ears and from our eyes and so on, and kind of this thing in the dark chamber has to kind of create this reality that we experience, which is such a good reality that, you know, we were able to move around the world and not bump into things and stuff like that. Well, what their work was doing was to question, to what extent is the reality out there the same as the reality that our brain constructs for us? And they did the mathematical formula on this to try and figure out the answer to that question. And what they discovered was quite remarkable, that the chances of the reality out there in the actual world being the same as the reality that we experience through what our brain creates for us is exactly zero. Get that? Not just that it's low probability, but it's exactly zero. There is no chance that what is really out there in the world matches what our brain constructs for us in order to help us move through the world. And in fact, they argued that what evolution actually does is strips away that reality, because the reality is not particularly helpful in terms of getting us our evolutionary payoffs. So, for instance, you know, getting us food to eat in order to keep us going and being able to procreate and all those kind of things. That's what our systems are really interested in. And in order to get us to do that, he argues that evolution actually strips away the reality to such an extent that we're left with something different, but something that is more useful to us. And the analogy that he gave is, do you know when you open up your computer and your email icon is there and it looks like a little envelope, doesn't it, probably, on most email icons? And what he's saying is that is something that represents email. But in actual fact, what's going on, the reality of email, are all these kind of ones and zeros and all this kind of computer stuff. But what the envelope does is, it's not reality, because the reality isn't that useful to us, but it's a representation of reality that's like a user interface that we can just double click on, and then we're able to see our email. And in the same way, he's saying that what our brain is constructing for us is a version, a representation of reality that is different to what's out there, that we can never see, that we can never access. But it's like a user interface. It's like Microsoft Windows. It's like the Apple Mac desktop. It's something that allows us to point and click through, which is very different to what's actually going on in the computer with all its ones and zeros and electrical impulses. But it's something that we can make sense of, that allows us to then go ahead and do whatever it is we needed to do. And in the same way, our brain basically acts as the same job. It's like a user interface designer that creates a user interface that is completely different from reality. In fact, the likelihood of it being the same as reality is exactly zero. And yet it creates something that is useful for us instead. And as well as just being a really freaky thing to think about, really fascinating, interesting thing, what it also suggests is that evolution is teaching us something there. And what it's teaching us is that what our brain is more interested in is not what is true. It doesn't care about that at all. In fact, it's creating something, according to this physicist, it's creating something which is specifically not true. So it's not interested in truth, whether what we believe is true. That's by the by. All that it's interested in is whether it's useful, whether it's something that we can make use of in order to get us the thing that we need. And so this evolution has created this process for us so that it's easier for us to get the things that we need, like food or ways to procreate, basically ways to stay surviving in order to be able to pass our genes on. And it doesn't care about the reality at all. It's just interested in that. It's just interested in ensuring that it creates something useful for us so we can get what we need. And I think there's a really important lesson in that, because what that suggests then is that when evolution is just set loose to try and give us some sort of optimum outcome, the optimum outcome leans so heavily towards what's going to be useful to us that it's actually prepared to strip reality back completely. And so when we're looking at our own beliefs, we can often get sucked into this way of thinking about beliefs and think, well, no, it's true. And we get caught in the true-false game. But what evolution is actually teaching us is that's kind of irrelevant. It's certainly irrelevant to evolution because it's apparently created something that has no real bearing on the reality out there, but it's useful. And what a lovely benchmark that is when it comes to our own beliefs about ourselves and people and life and the world. Because the question isn't, well, is this true? Which can really lock us into something. The question is this useful? If I were to tell myself, for instance, that, I don't know, nobody likes me, we could debate whether that's true or false. But the real question is it useful? I could tell myself that making money is hard, and we could have a really good debate about whether that's true or false, but the key question is that belief useful? And so by looking at the way evolution has constructed this for us, it gives us that benchmark, doesn't it? That every belief that we have, we can step away from that argument over, oh yes, it is true. Oh yes, it's absolutely true that making money is hard. It's absolutely true that nobody likes me. It's absolutely true that I'm not a lovable person. Or we could just ditch all that and just ask the question, how does this serve me? How does that as a user interface help me get through life? Does it get in my way? In which case we can sling it and put it in the recycle can and get something else instead. Because that really is the key thing. If you're going to get yourself a user interface, you may as well get one that is going to help you to get the things you need. And so I thought that was dead interesting. I wanted to share it with you. So if you find it interesting as well, then pass it on to somebody. Let them hear about it too. And if you'd like to work with me one-to-one, I'm Alun Parry. You can find me at liverpoolpsychotherapy.co.uk. If you'd like all these on video, just go to sliceoftherapy.com. And if you'd like to subscribe to the podcast, you can do that completely free wherever you get your podcasts from. So thanks for listening, and I'll be back again tomorrow with another one.